The original PlayStation is fondly remembered as being the home to several of what many consider to be the best JRPGs of all time, with games like Final Fantasy 7-9, Xenogears, Breath of Fire 3 and 4, Wild Arms 1 and 2, and many other classics. But more importantly, the PlayStation saw the debut of the first two Suikoden games. The Suikoden series is loosely based off the classical Chinese novel by Xu Nan, Shu Hu Zuan, which I probably just butchered, which translates to Outlaws of the March. Set during the Song Dynasty, the story of the novel set around the struggles of a group of 108 outlaws and their eventual formation to a sizable and powerful army that fights foreign invaders and rebel forces. The Suikoden series is loosely based off the events of this novel, with many reoccurring themes being present over the course of the series, most prominent of which being the 108 Stars of Destiny as characters that play a large role in the story of each game. Developed and produced by Konami, the first game of the series, simply called Suikoden, released in North America on December 28, 1996 as one of the first RPGs on the PlayStation. So, how does the beginning of this series hold up? Is it worthy of still being considered a classic, or has age finally caught up with it? Let's see for ourselves. Suikoden centers around the political strife within the Scarlet Moon Empire. Our protagonist is a silent character named by players who happens to be the son of the most famous general of the Empire. After meeting with various members of the court, including the Emperor himself, our hero is quickly conscripted into the army, hoping to follow in his father's footsteps. As such, the first few hours of the game are actually spent serving as a grunt in the army, completing various tasks such as delivering items to different towns, fighting bandits, and collecting taxes, but things are never so simple in an RPG. During this time, the player quickly discovers firsthand the Scarlet Moon Empire is nearly completely and hopelessly corrupt. After acquiring a magical artifact called the Soul Eater rune, the hero and his friends are quickly deemed traitors of the Empire and are forced to escape with the help of a wandering stranger named Victor. With his help, the party escapes the Imperial capital and meets with the Resistance and its leader Odessa. After helping out the Resistance for a short while, Odessa is killed, but in her dying breath deems our hero her successor and the new leader of the Resistance. From here on out, players must seek out the 108 Stars of Destiny, establish new headquarters, and of course fight in a civil war against the various generals of the Scarlet Moon Empire, including the hero's father. I won't delve any further, but I will say that the overall story is very straightforward and doesn't really pull any punches. But having said that, I really enjoy the story's execution. Suikoden does a really good job at establishing its game world and various narrative points like the Empire's corruptions or the struggles of different towns and their people within the Empire. Suikoden's story is also notable for focusing on political intrigue over high-stakes fantasy elements, although they are still present. There is no world-ending plot as the narrative is solely focused on the rebellion, and I think the story is much better off thanks to its focus. Overall, I do enjoy the story and I think it has aged fairly well, but don't expect anything mind-blowing. I haven't really mentioned any of the characters yet, and that mainly extends to the fact that there are 108 of them that are important to the story. Each of the characters you will recruit into the rebellion is referred to as one of the Stars of Destiny, which clearly stems from the source material. As you may have guessed, not many of them get much development, but there was clearly an effort to differentiate each character as seen in their unique sprites, and while brief but colorful dialogue. Thankfully, not all of them are playable, as many serve different functions such as being merchants, blacksmiths, or innkeepers, playing a support role of sorts. From a gameplay standpoint, Suikoden is a very standard RPG and should be quite simple to grasp for anyone remotely familiar with the genre. Battles occur in a rigid turn-based manner and will be triggered at random, but thankfully the encounter rate is fairly lax. Players select each party member's action from a list of basic options, such as attacking, defending, using items, or this game's form of magic, runes. Instead of using MP, each rune has multiple spells, each with a limited amount of uses that can be restored upon resting at ends. However, something unique to Suikoden is how battles proceed, most notably how your party attacks simultaneously. Because of this, encounters proceed much quicker and overall feel much more fast-paced than your standard turn-based RPG. There's even an option to let the game automatically choose your party's actions. Unfortunately, this option is a bit too useful, as many battles can be very easily resolved by continually using this auto-battle option. It doesn't help that the overall difficulty is on the easy side, with a few battles requiring much in tactics. Most of the challenge in combat is actually outside of battles. Your party composition is vital to your success. I mainly refer to your party formation as there is 2 rows to place your characters, the front and back. Characters with weapons like swords or axes are best to be in the front line, whereas archers or spear throwers are much better off in the back row. You should also compose your active party with members that have an affinity with one another, as they can use powerful unite attacks. These attacks combine the actions of 2 or more characters in a turn to perform a special attack, in a manner evocative of the tech system seen in Chrono Trigger. It should also be noted that each character must be equipped with both a rune or items to use them in battle, and having such a large roster can make managing each character's inventory rather annoying and time consuming. Thankfully, equipment management is streamlined with all characters coming with a set weapon that can be upgraded, so players only need to periodically replace armor or accessories. There are also some interesting variations of battles that the game will require you to play during pivotal moments in the story, these being the army battles and the one-on-one duels. Both of these only occur when you engage a general of the Empire, with the army battles representing a large conflict between your armies that use a rock, paper, scissors system to determine the victor. Afterwards, the player will engage in a duel with the enemy general that uses a similar system. These types of battles aren't very refined and are rather simple, but they provide an interesting variety of the gameplay and one that I feel is welcome. Outside of battle, your primary concern is visiting the various towns and other locations to track down all the 108 Stars of Destiny, some of which are necessary to progress the story and the rest being optional. Most will simply join your cause after a single conversation, but others can have more requirements, like certain characters only joining after a specific point in the game, or others requiring that you have a specific army size before they join your ranks. This character system is easily one of the most engaging and frustrating aspects of the game, as it can be very immersive to slowly build up your army, and some of these character missions offer an interesting diversion from the main quest, but others can only be recruited during a specific window of time during the main story and cannot be recruited afterwards. This wouldn't be so bad in of itself, but there are multiple endings that are directly dependent on how close you are to recruiting all 108 Stars of Destiny. As such, if you plan on getting the perfect ending, I highly recommend using a walkthrough to save yourself some major headaches down the line. As a whole, the actual gameplay of Suikoden has aged rather well, but it does suffer from a lack of difficulty in both standard and army battles. The 108 Stars of Destiny system can be engaging and interesting to invest yourself in, but it can also be an enormous annoyance to get all of them. Character inventory management also becomes a chore due to the large roster, but despite all that, the overall game has still held up after all of these years as extraordinarily well paced. Upon its original release, Suikoden did receive some flack from critics at the time for being a 2D sprite-based game, when most others made the jump to 3D. However, I believe that decision to stick with sprites was a great one, as the game is visually aged much better for it. Each character has a distinctive sprite that is clearly well designed and animated. Each important character also has a distinctive portrait, all of which look great and help differentiate the various 108 Stars of Destiny. The only real complaint I have towards the visuals is that the overworld graphics are incredibly simple looking, making most locations kind of blend together, making it a little difficult to remember the locations of different towns. The game's soundtrack, while quite different from most RPGs, is rather refreshing and suits the game quite well. I wouldn't necessarily listen to any of these songs outside of the game, but most of the music is very fitting for the situations they're used in, and offer a nice change from most RPG soundtracks. The rest of the sound design is fairly standard fare, although there are some rather unusual sound effects used, with this being the prime example. As well, I found the sound effect used when pressing through dialogue to be kind of irritating and out of place. Aside from those few nitpicks, the sound design for the most part is rather good, especially if you consider the game's time of release. So, overall, I believe that Suikoden has aged quite well thanks to some well-paced, if a bit easy battles, and largely the game's streamlined focus on its narrative and select characters, as well as some incredibly cool moments. I'll never forget the first time I unlocked my army's base, or the epic showdown between the player character and his father. I also think the sprite-based visuals have also helped this game overcome its own age, as many of the 3D visuals seen throughout the PlayStation 1 era have not aged so well. The overall game is rather short for an RPG, clocking in around 20 hours, but you can add maybe 3 to 4 more if you plan on getting the perfect ending. At the time of its original release, Suikoden had a limited amount of copies printed, making the game rather difficult and expensive to track down. Thankfully, you can download the game via the PlayStation Network for a mere $5.99. This downloadable version of Suikoden will run the PSP, PS3, and the Vita, making it the most easily accessible and the version I'd personally recommend. There is also a Japanese exclusive PSP port that's supposedly the definitive version according to the internet, but sadly it's entirely Japanese and as such of no consequence to me. Well, that's all for now. Join me in the coming weeks and possibly months as we continue the Suikoden retrospective. Be sure to tune in next time as I'll look at what many consider to be the best RPG ever. As always, been Darren of the Gaming Pilgrimage. Till next time.